Yes, welcome to this lecture. This is EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. In this lecture, we shall define what environment is, what an impact means, what EIA means. Then we shall talk about when did EIA start, then the reasons for conducting EIA in our projects, developments, or farms. Then we shall finalize with the process of EIA. So we define environment as surrounding or settings in which human beings, animals, plants live or operate in. We used to know that environment means man and his surrounding. So for this case of EIA, we shall be assessing impacts that can be caused by a project on humans, on animals, plants, and the rest of the environment, such as water resources such as river or lakes and air. That's basically what environment means. Having known what environment means, we shall now talk about impact. An impact basically means a change or a deviation from the baseline situation that is caused by an activity. We look at the place or an area where you're going to set up your project. So we first of all assess the baseline situation. How is the situation in that particular area? And now we can look at which impacts can be caused by that particular project that can cause a change in the baseline. If we speak of impacts that can be caused by a project, we have one could be beneficial impact. If we are speaking about the types of impacts, one is beneficial impacts. Beneficial means these are important impacts. These are of great importance to us. For example, when you're setting up a project in an area, you can be creating jobs. So job employment creation would be a beneficial impact. So look at your project and you assess which impacts are really useful to human or to the environment. Then the other type of impact we have adverse impacts. Adverse impacts are like more that cause harm to the environment. Which impacts can be caused by your project and could harm either human beings or could cause harm on the environment. Maybe water, maybe population of insects, maybe change in population, maybe soil erosion and others. Then the other type of impacts is long-term and then the short-term impacts. Long-term, it means these are impacts that will still be in existence as long as your project is still running. In short-term, these are not always long. Then the cumulative impacts, they're more like they're frequent, they will be occurring. Which impacts will be occurring as your project is being done or even after it has been done. Then lastly, we have what we call as direct impacts, then the indirect impacts. Those are directly caused by your project. So we now know what environment means. We say that environment basically means man and his surroundings. An impact is a change in or a deviation from the baseline situation that is caused by your particular project or development that you're setting up in an area. So we basically have 5 types of impacts that can be caused by a project: beneficial impacts, adverse impacts, long-term and short-term, cumulative, and lastly, direct and indirect impacts. So we now know what environment means, then we know what an impact means. So what does environmental impact assessment mean? What does EIA mean? EIA will basically deal with analyzing impacts that can be caused by a project or a farm or a development in an area. And we look at finding ways on how we could mitigate those impacts. So EIA basically means we have to analyze different impacts that can be caused by a project or a development in an area, and we look at how we could mitigate those impacts, especially those that are adverse impacts. That's what basically EIA means. Your role is to analyze which you predict which impact can be caused by the project. So EIA, when did it start? Before 1960s, we had no EIA. Like projects would be run, you just run your project or your development or your farm without conducting an EIA. By then, we had like three critical environmental crises that called for need to have tools that can assess environmental health. These three environmental crises include what we call as the silent spring, then we have what we call as London fog, and lastly, the burning or the fires of River Cuyahoga. We can speak about these crises in details. The first crisis is silent springs. This was documented by a writer known as Rachel Carlson, that is in 1960s in US. So Rachel Carlson, in her publication that she named as Silent Springs, she was alarming. She was informing the environment about the effects that can be caused by DDT. By then, they could spray DDT to kill different insects. But you find that DDT could again kill even other insects that were not targeted. And not only that, she was informing the environment that DDT as a chemical could end up within the food chain. And when it ends up in the food chain, the community or the humans will end up with various impacts such as cancer. So she was true. When they did research, they found out that DDT had been found in most of the food value chain, such as the foods, water, fish, and others. So an environmental crisis that needed us to have a tool that could assess environmental health. That's one of the crises. Then the second crisis is London fog, the Great London Fog. In 1952, that was in December 5th up to December 9th, there was fog in the city of London. The fog was attributed to pollution. This was basically industrial pollution, mostly burning of coal. And most people died because of the fog, and that led to need to have a tool that could assess environmental health. 1954, they came up with Air Clean Act so that they can now combat the pollution. Then crisis number three that was a justification to us to have EIA was what we call as River Cuyahoga. That's in Ohio. It could get fire because of the pollution of steel of coal. So we see that early days, because of pollution, was mostly industrial, and because of the impacts that were affecting the environment, there was need for us to have a tool that could assess the environmental health. Hence, now we have what we call as EIA as one of the tools that we can use to assess the health of the environment. In Uganda, before 1995, we had things like what we call as urban planning. We have we have investment code, and within those two, the urban planning and investment code, they were also trying to look at how they could prevent the environment from being destroyed, but it was not really much. Not until 1995 when there was a body. This is National Environmental Statute. It now speaks about the need to protect the environment. Currently in Uganda we have NEMA. It's a body that is responsible for protecting the environment. Within the Constitution of Uganda, there are three acts or rules or laws that protect the environment. For example, when you read Article 39, it says every citizen has a right to clean and healthy environment or clean environment. Every citizen has a right to clean and healthy environment. When you talk about National Objective 27, it tells you about the protection of natural resources, such as the lakes, rivers, and others. That's the same when you read about Article 237B. It tells you about local government, and government will be in response of protecting those natural resources such as water, lakes, rivers, forests, swamps, wetlands, and others. So those are the three laws in our constitution that talk about protecting the environment. So when you're conducting EIA, we have different terms that we use. One is developer. Developer basically means a person or a group of persons, it could be a company or an agency or firm that is developing the new project has to be subjected to EIA. For example, if you're conducting mining in an area, you must conduct EIA. It means that you, as a person who is setting up a mining company, you are now the developer. And your project has to be subjected to EIA process so that we can now know which impacts can it cause, and which ones are adverse, which ones are beneficial, which one could be cumulative, which one could be direct, which one could be indirect. And then our aim is now to predict those impacts, then we come up with solutions that we can use. Then different projects may call for full EIA, others may not call for full EIA. We shall speak of those projects. For example, like if maybe you're setting up a petrol station in an area, maybe you're setting up an industry, maybe you're doing mining, maybe you're constructing roads. Those are some of the projects. Maybe you're starting up, you're trying up with your new plant. Maybe you can see how it will perform. So now, those are some of the examples of projects that require EIA. EIA, it means a process of analyzing impacts. It can be caused by a project or a farm on the environment, and then look at how we will find mitigation solutions to mitigate those, or to reduce or to avoid those suggested impacts. Then we have what we call as EI study or evaluative impact study. This is basically a report that is done after you have conducted your evaluative impact assessment. After I've done EIA, we always have two things. We have environmental monitoring, then environmental auditing. Environmental auditing, we look at compliance of your project on the proposed impacts. If you are discussing about how you can mitigate them, are you mitigating or you're not following what was suggested? That is what basically environmental auditing means. Then this is where we can conclude with the process of EIA. How do we conduct EIA? Environmental impact assessment process involves three phases. We have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 basically deals with screening. Screening, we look at your project, then we will predict the impacts that it will cause. If those impacts are of less significance to the environment, then it means that your project does not require full EIA. It can stop at screening. But if we predict that your project will cause adverse effects or will cause impacts that are significant to the environment, then it will now call for full EIA. And that project shall now take us to phase 2. Phase 2 involves 4 things. 1 is scoping, then 2 is baseline study, then 3 is impact analysis, and lastly, impact mitigation. That is what is involved in phase 2. We say that we start with scoping, then we have baseline study, then we have impact analysis, and lastly, impact mitigation. So in phase 2, we come on ground, then we conduct a baseline study. We find out what are the real problems that your project may cause on the environment. Then we also look at the status. What is the current status of the environment? When you're conducting phase 2, basically the part of scoping and baseline study, we involve the public. We involve the public as we are conducting our baseline study. Then we come up with different impacts. We group them depending on their frequency, then their occurrence that we have predicted. After that, we can now come up with solutions how we could mitigate those significant adverse impacts that can be caused by your project on the environment. And after that has been done, we now write the EI report. Then that takes us to our last phase of EIA process, that is phase 3. And phase 3 basically contains two things: decision making and then environmental monitoring. In phase 3, where we have decision making, your project can either be passed, meaning it can be approved if the impacts that have been predicted, we have got solutions, or we have shown solutions on how we shall mitigate those different impacts. Then if your project we have predicted impacts that can be shown, but you are not really satisfied with how you mitigate them, then your project will be disapproved. And if your project is disapproved, you will now go and redesign, then you submit it again for decision making. Then for the case of projects that have been passed or that have been approved, you shall always do what we call as the monitoring and the evaluation. You shall now monitor at a later time and you find out those mitigation solutions to your impacts, are they being done? That's all about EIA. So when we speak of EIA, environmental impact assessment, you must know what environment means. You must know what an impact means. You must know the different types of impacts that can be caused by a project on the environment. Then you must know when did EIA start. Then you must know some guiding laws or that speak about protecting the environment in Uganda. Then lastly, you must know the whole process of EIA. So that process involves 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, and lastly the phase 3.